Let's continue then on the story. We are now joined via Zoom by Professor Chris Isike, who is a professor of African politics and international relations at the University of Pretoria. We're weighing in on the political developments then in the UK, where, of course, the Prime Minister Liz Truss has indeed resigned. Prof, a pleasure having you on the show once again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
You're most welcome, sir. Are you surprised? I mean, we're really sort of focusing on the time period, as in, how short a time it was that Liz Truss was in office. But, some political pundits saying that's irrelevant. She was a disaster. She was really just not good for the position. So whatever time it had been, she had to go. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, I agree. And I wasn't surprised because just a week after she became Prime Minister, a friend of mine, a professor at the University of Alberta, sent me a message and said she's not going to last very long. And immediately I heard the news this afternoon. I sent him a message to say, you called it. And the reason why that was the case was because she appeared very ill prepared for the position. And she's not known, if you look at her historically, in terms of how she has moved between the Liberal Democrat Party to joining the Conservative Party in 2001, and then, initially against Brexit, and then eventually changing her mind and becoming part of Brexit. And if you look at how she treated the former Chancellor, who was a personal friend, one would have thought that if she was honorable, that was the right time to have turned the towel. So she's been a figure that is not known for consistency and having a good grasp of the position. I think that it was just trust on her, and it was convenient for her at the time. In my view, the person she contended with, Rishi Sunak, was much more competently prepared for the job at the time. But somehow she got it, and it's unfortunate that this is the story. But I'm not surprised.
Yeah, just bringing you back into a conversation I had in the last hour with my international news editor Sophie Mukwena, and I spoke about the fact that it does seem that in the UK the wheels of change when it comes to prime ministers happens quite frequently and often. I mean, this is an extreme example. It's happened in 45 days. One wonders, is that a good thing or is it in fact a bad thing? I was trying to think of it in the context of South Africa, and if we'd had a president sitting for 45 days, how that would be seen as sort of catastrophic. But in the context of the UK, it's actually not seen in a bad way.
Well, it's not seen as such, but then it's also one of the drawbacks of the parliamentary democracy. The Tory party, they have a good majority in parliament, and they seem to have the confidence that they have the confidence, the vote, the mandate of the people. But if you look at how turbulent they have been, since the Brexit vote, we've had 4 prime ministers come and go. The shortest being the Liz Truss now, and like she said, they are preparing to have another one by the next week. How prepared this person would be, whether it will not be a repeat of the same, is questionable. So it raises the question of how much changes, how much chaos does the Tory party, the Conservative Party, need to experience at top level before they say, no, it's time for us to take the decision back to the people? I think that this is something that is worth ruminating over. As a democracy, what does it really mean? Should it be taking the sovereignty back to the people, or should it be at the behest of party leaders, like we talk about in South Africa, where party shiftings can recall a president and then change the president, sometimes without the mandate of the people who actually voted or did not vote that president. So these are questions that we need to ask about what democracy is and how representative it should be.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, what's next for the Tories? I mean, I don't think that the British public necessarily has much faith in them now, given the fact that you yourselves managed to select someone who was not appropriate for the position. But they could argue, well, we got rid of that person relatively quickly and we're moving on now. But just the faith that the Brits would then, or lack of faith they would then have, with the Tories.
Yeah, but so the question will be at what cost? At what cost to the British people? She came on to the position, of course, she inherited a declining or a slow growth economy. A lot of challenges people were facing. So she was supposed to come fix those, but she couldn't. So the question is, at what cost to the people, to the British people, the British economy, the housing crisis, the inflation crisis, at what cost to them, even though they got rid of her quite quickly? And what is the guarantee that not in a week? I mean, if you look at how long it took, the whole process of selecting the new prime minister that eventually Liz Truss won, that was a much longer process. Now they're proposing a shorter process within a week. By next week, Thursday, they say, on the 28th. Yeah. So how do we know that this will not be another, a mistake? But of course, even if we're to do elections, to not be something that should be called within the next couple of months. So they have to prepare for that. So there should be a prime minister in place, and hopefully, if they don't fix the problems, in the coming months, then perhaps they should take this to the British people to decide once and for all where their future to be directed to.
And I suppose Liz Truss's mandate was quite clear. I mean, given the fact that, in her statement, she said something about the fact that she was unable to deliver on her mandate. But, one would ask the question, was 45 days even enough for one to be able to deliver, even if that mandate was specific and very clear? Another thing that she did mention quite a lot there in her statement was the Russia-Ukraine war, and one wonders if might that have had some sort of impact, on her tenure in office, her short tenure in office in any way.
I don't think it did. It's more to do with the domestic crisis at home that she couldn't quite handle, and then the loss of credibility with the way that she handled the issue of her chancellor. I think she actually threw him under the bus, and that affected the economy. It affected the public confidence in our government. She became open, fair game for everyone to criticize. The Tory government ratings plummeted as a result. So it was more domestic, because let's not forget that, and this is why it's also difficult to say she was inexperienced, because she had been Justice Secretary, and then she was also International Relations, Foreign Secretary, which would have been able to give her good mettle to be able to face the Ukraine crisis and state and implement the British position on Russia's war in Ukraine. But that is not the case. I think that it had more to do with the domestic troubles at home, and the fact that our parties seem to be losing the plots.
All right, Prof, always a pleasure having you here on the show. We appreciate you giving us your time as always. That's Professor Chris Isike, who's a professor of African politics and international relations at the University of Pretoria.